Steve, what would you say to those who are thinking about anticipating things, who want to tee up in advance how they will behave when litigation comes along?
To the point Judge Conte is making about sort of naming a champion, one of the things that is very helpful is for someone to nominate an IT person who is this point person, who understands what evidence is, how to collect it, how to treat it. And what happens in a lot of organizations is that they don't really nominate that person. They run around when the house is on fire, so to speak, and they find someone who knows the most about the most systems. And one thing we see is companies have done a very good job archiving and collecting data, but what they haven't done is anticipated the volume and scale of an issue and all the different application stores they're going to have to dip into to satisfy a court that they've made a good faith effort to find all the messages and things that are relevant. So they know that they have an issue, and they know they need a smart person who kind of has this overall view of the IT systems to help them. What they haven't progressed to yet, this is back to my evolutionary comment, and vendors has kind of led them astray on this a bit too. They do know they have to archive things. What they haven't done is really laid out a strategy to educate this internal person in the rules of evidence, along with the types of technical expertise you need to produce the results that you need to help a company like Peters come in and do the collection and do a good faith review.
Where do they get that education from?
Well, a lot of vendors, I say a lot of the vendors have led them astray is because, like most vendors, they have a particular technique they like. And they say, you should use my search engine.
This is the way to go.
This is the way to go.
Yeah.
And that's probably true for a slice of the problems someone may encounter with their email server or their SharePoint environment or something. But it's not a good overall solution. The other thing that sort of snuck up on IT people is just the sheer magnitude of the problem. With your laptop, I'm sure you have a 500 gigabyte drive, right? And the first thing someone like Peter's company is going to recommend is let's go do an end case collection of all those. And you have to keep all those around, you have to keep the data you took out of them, the indexes you built, and it's just a huge storage problem. We've been kind of able to sweep that under the rug because storage has been fairly inexpensive. But when you're under the gun and you're being reactive, provisioning 20 or 40 terabytes of storage is a non-trivial event. So when you get to the evolution questions you're probably going to ask us later, I'll have some more comments about how I think this will evolve. But it becomes a huge problem, and companies have to start thinking about who in IT is going to lead the band for them, what relationships they're going to build with companies like Peters, how they're going to train people in the storage organization, the application realm, any offsite services they use so that they handle evidence appropriately.
And the real issue is there's nobody pulling the strings and directing that this person ought to know this and that.
Right, and we're finding that it's a recognized need. And I think we're sort of in the evolutionary stage of management is getting their arms around it and starting to nominate the champion, and the champion starting to figure out what they have. But we're not quite there yet. I do see that IT Uber person realizing that one vendor doesn't have all the answers, though, generally.
What about those who haven't done any of this? The first they've thought about it is when the problem arises.
They're the real interesting ones because
I like that word, interesting.
Yeah, because they're the ones who jump around with their hair on fire. The house is still burning, but their hair is also on fire. And they're basically grasping at straws a lot. And Peter could probably tell you some better stories than I. But the main thing you walk into is they'll have a huge issue and they have to do something so rapidly that they'll be asking for, they'll be willing to take a chance on a technological solution they wouldn't normally. That's been to the benefit of my company. We can handle that.
Yeah.
So it's good for us, but people realize they can't do that forever.
Are you seeing people getting better at planning? Under planning, over planning, just running around, as Steve says, with their hair on fire?
Slowly but surely, I think it's getting better. And I think one thing that's lost in all this discussion is that the sale to companies, from my experience, is not in this will make your litigation go smoother. The sale is this will help your business run better. And businessmen want to make decisions based upon business decisions and business reasons, not for potential litigation. And I think that's the sale to these companies, or that in organizing yourself better for business, the benefit from that is you're going to be better prepared for litigation. And that's where I think the sort of organization, pre-organization is coming from.
And what about planning when once litigation strikes? That's presumably something, the action started day one, what happens then?
Yeah, I think that, again, if obviously you've got a better organized house, it's easier to deal with what your sources of information are. I think companies are again, if they've been through litigation a number of times, they start to realize what steps have to happen, and they're a little more willing to engage the appropriate people earlier in the process. And that's the key to all of it, is as early as possible understanding what you have so that you can make smart decisions about it and not be overdoing it because you've run out of time.
Can I just support your point? What we've seen, initial spend, for tools and technologies has kind of started at the inside corporate counsel, and that knowledge that some insight into the data, as Peter said, knowing what you have as being necessary, has proliferated into the compliance group and people who have some sort of title that really means records manager. Yeah. So that's good. And now I think we're at that second stage of evolution where, like Peter says, people are realizing, wow, this does help me run my business. And these tools and techniques I have right now, they really aren't holistic and complete for helping me save the maximum amount of money, but they're very helpful. And people are starting to ask the questions of vendors and people like, in companies like Peter's. Okay, great, how do I make this more holistic? How do I go beyond, say, an appliance model to ubiquitous infrastructure that'll help me run my business, understand what's in my data?
And we're seeing more of that.
We're seeing more of it. We're seeing projects get planned.
And who's driving that? Because you've got all these different interest groups, each with their own budget, their own problems, and their own individual careers. Where do you see the primary force coming from?
Well, what we see is we see someone in the compliance department, or they always have a different title, which makes it very difficult to find them. But they work in IT more and more for a CIO, and they're very attached to the general counsel's office. And they're tasked with coming up with strategies for better managing their data. And when you talk to them about their objectives, they have an exigent need to respond to some sort of litigation event with a longer-term focus towards getting their data understood, as you were saying, and managed in some way.
On the whole, I suspect that when people have got a problem on their desk today, they rather forget the long-term strategy, and that much of that thinking comes retrospectively when they come to add up what they've spent. Are people doing this, in fact? Are they, at the end of a piece of litigation, are they going back, are they coming to you and saying, right, what were all these costs? How do we break it down? What should we do next time? Are you getting that?
Yeah, I would say 90% of our retention work comes from a litigation client who said, I don't want to do this again. And as you mentioned, I think the sale primarily is pushed through in-house counsel office or something similar, documents management departments within a group who say, listen, we realize in going through this effort and exercise that we've got a lot more than we need to be keeping, and our policy's been keep it all because we don't know what we need.
So they go right back to that. They realize that fundamental conclusion.
Right. And I always my first discussion with potential clients are, don't think of this as a document retention policy. You really need a document retirement policy, because that's where people generally fail, is they don't know what they can get rid of, and they don't have a plan in place that allows them to defensively do that.
Document destruction policy, and the English judge said very forcibly at a conference I was at the other day. let's call a spade a spade. It's a document destruction policy.
Exactly.
Can we move on perhaps to the tools? What sort of applications, what sort of tools that the companies and or the lawyers need when the problems, either in anticipation of problems or when they've arisen?
Right. Again, as the industry's evolved, a lot of people started off with kind of enterprise search. Many of those products were built to power an e-commerce website or to help you find as many documents as possible with vague general terms. As you know, legal discovery is a very vertical application, right? You're interested in documents, but they must lie within a certain date range. You don't want to find everything that is a duplicate. You want to pare things down while you're finding everything relevant. So people have come to the realization that, wow, I really need an eDiscovery focus tool. And data mapping, you know, figuring out what data I possibly have somewhere in the organization is, in my opinion, kind of a nirvana-like goal that people would like to have a tool for. They have no idea how to get there. Like Peter was saying, you know, many people, you know, they don't say, geez, I need a business records plan. But some, you know, irritant litigation is happening. They say, geez, you know, this is the third time in a year I've stopped everything going on in IT, and I've got people running around figuring out who owns what where. People just don't know all the different repositories of their data.
And judges are pretty intolerant of that.
Right, and you know, you have home email accounts, you have iPads, you have all these different mobile devices where messages can lie and copies of things can be placed. And it just scares IT people beyond imagination to have to go find every one. So they really fear the day that, you know, they have to do that. And they don't have a tool beyond kind of their search infrastructure, which isn't built for this. So back to, you know, what I was saying before, a lot of them have purchased, you know, appliance-type products. They know they can load and unload. It's terribly labor-intensive, much more tuned to reactive kind of events. But really what they want to move for, and we're starting to see RFPs planning for, are tools that give them a good idea of the age of their documents, you know, capturing the metadata that's relevant, so they can go in and do a more full-featured examination of the data and index, if you will. That'll help them really understand the data later. But 90% of it, Peter can attest, is knowing which documents just fall in the age range and who owns them. And most people don't have a ubiquitous.
Pretty basic sort of parameters.
It's kind of
around
basic.
the collection.
Yeah.
Is that in fact your experience?
Yeah, you know, I think the ideal of relevance is amorphous at best, and you know, sides argue over that constantly. So as much as you can put hard parameters on documents, date ranges, and different things like that, that makes it a lot easier to identify applicable sources of information. So I think, as Steve mentions, getting to that point is a critical first stage.
And it does sound simple, but when you think of how big these storage archives are, you see why people are having a hard time figuring out how to budget for this.
And it's not just a matter of throwing some expensive tools or cheap tools or any tools at it. There's much more to it than just the software.